My family forced me to pay rent at 14, but when my grandparents discovered my parents stole my education fund to give it to my brother, they disinherited them and gave me everything. I'm 18 years old. I study art at an incredible university, and if you had asked me 2 years ago if this was possible, I would have told you that you were crazy. Because, honestly, for most of my life, I was basically the daughter who didn't matter, the one who was just there to pay bills and be the shadow of my perfect brother. And I know that sounds dramatic, but I need to tell you this story because there are still days when I wake up and I can't believe I actually managed to get out of all that. I guess I should start at the beginning. When I was like 5 years old, it was Christmas. And I remember that day perfectly because it was the first time I really understood that something was wrong in my family, although obviously I didn't have the words to explain it at that moment. My parents had bought presents, typical Christmas stuff, and there were 2 boxes under the tree. One was big and the other was smaller. I was a little kid, you know what I mean? So, obviously I assumed the big box was for me because I was the youngest in the family. Connor was like 13 years old then. So anyway, I open my gift and it's this beautiful art set, like with watercolors and crayons and everything. And I was super excited because I had always loved drawing. But then my dad, literally in the middle of my happiness, snatches the box from my hands and gives it to Connor. And he tells me, "No, this one is for your brother. Yours is the other one." The other one was basically a cheap coloring book and a box of those dollar store crayons. Connor didn't even want the art set. He was into sports and video games, but my parents insisted it was his. I cried all day, obviously. I was 5 years old and I didn't understand why my dad had taken my gift away to give it to Connor when Connor clearly didn't want it. But what really changed everything was that my grandparents, my mom's parents, were there that day. They saw everything. And like a week later, a huge package arrived at the house. My grandparents had sent me a doghouse, one of those wooden ones, painted in bright colors, with my name on the entrance. It was big enough for me to sit inside, and it came with its own art set and books and cushions. My parents tried to say it was too expensive and that they should return it, but my grandparents basically told them to shut up. From that day on, that little house was my refuge. I spent all my time in there drawing, and it was like the beginning of a super special relationship with my grandparents that literally saved my life years later. Things only got worse as I grew up. When I was 13 years old, my parents decided we needed to move to a new house. A super expensive house in a fancy neighborhood. You know, one of those with a huge yard and modern kitchen and all that stuff. Why? Because Connor was going to start college, and they wanted him to have the perfect house to bring his friends to. They're both college professors, my mom and my dad, so it's not like they were poor, but they weren't swimming in money either. You know what I mean? But for them, it was worth going into debt, as long as Connor had the best. I remember that for that Christmas, when we had just moved, I bought Connor a watch. It wasn't anything special. It had cost me about $50 that I had saved from my allowance. But it was nice, and I thought he would like it. I wrapped it really well and gave it to him at Christmas dinner. Connor opened it and said, "Oh, thanks, it's fine." And I felt proud, because I had managed to buy him something with my own money. But my dad grabbed it, looked at it, and said, "This is too basic for Connor," and literally took it away from him and put it in a drawer. I found out later they had sold it online. They didn't even give me the money back. But what really destroyed me was what happened when I turned 14. It was my birthday. A normal Tuesday. Nothing special planned because there were never parties for me anyway. My parents sat me down at the dining room table after school and told me, "Look, you're 14 now. You're old enough to work, so from now on you're going to have to pay for your own expenses." And when I say my own expenses, I mean everything. Clothes, school supplies, feminine products, everything. Connor was in his second year of college at that time, and my parents were paying for absolutely everything for him. Full tuition, his apartment, his car, his outings, everything. But me, at 14 years old, I had to get a part-time job. I got a job at a clothing store at the mall. I was making like $7 an hour, and I worked every weekend and some days during the week after school. It was exhausting. You know what I mean? I was 14 years old and should have been worried about homework and friends, not about whether I was going to be able to buy tampons that month. But the thing is, my parents saw it as completely normal. In fact, They told people they were teaching me responsibility and discipline as if they were parents of the year or something. My grandparents found out because one day they saw me at work when they passed by the mall. My grandmother almost started crying right there. They asked me what was going on, and I told them everything. Like, I wasn't going to lie to them. They went directly to confront my parents. It was a horrible fight. I could hear the screaming from my room. My grandparents basically told them they were monsters for making me work as a minor to pay for my own things while Connor lived like a king. My parents defended themselves, saying I needed to learn the value of money. That Connor was different because he was in college and had a bright future ahead, and that I wasn't going to accomplish much in life anyway. Yes, they said that. My own parents. When I was 14 years old, the argument ended with my parents giving my grandparents an ultimatum. They told them to stop interfering or they wouldn't see me again. But before they left that day, my parents told me something that left me cold. They told me, since your grandparents think we treat you so badly, now you're going to start paying rent or you get out of this house. I was 14 years old. 14. Really? Rent? I told them I didn't have enough money, that I barely had enough for my things, and my dad answered me, then get more hours or go live with your grandparents if they love you so much. I talked to my grandparents that night crying on the phone. They wanted me to come live with them immediately, but I was scared. Honestly, I was afraid that if I left, my parents would never talk to me again, and as horrible as it sounds, I still had that stupid hope that someday they would love me like they loved Connor. So I made a plan with my grandparents. They would give me extra money in secret so I could pay the rent my parents demanded, and I would stay in the house until I turned 18 and could leave, legally without a problem. So yes, from 14 to 18 years old, I was paying rent in my parents' house. $300 a month, which doesn't sound like much, but when you make $7 an hour and you're a teenager, it's basically your entire paycheck. My grandparents helped me secretly. They deposited money to me every month so I could survive. But my parents never knew that. They thought I was paying for everything with my job, and they were proud of themselves for teaching me responsibility. Meanwhile, Connor continued being the golden child. He graduated from college when I was 16, and my parents threw him a huge party. They invited the entire extended family, rented a hall, hired catering, the whole package. I worked that day so I could pay my rent for the next month. Nobody noticed. I wasn't at the party until the end, when I arrived straight from work. My mom only told me, "You could have tried harder to arrive early. It's an important day for your brother." Things with Connor got weird after he graduated. He met a girl, fell in love super fast, and they decided to get married. But it wasn't a normal wedding. No. They went to Las Vegas and got married there. Just the two of them, without telling anyone until afterwards. My parents were furious. Not because Connor had gotten married, but because it hadn't been the big, perfect wedding they had imagined for their perfect son. My mom literally cried for days, saying they had robbed her of the opportunity to be mother of the bride. Or well, of the groom in this case. But the worst thing was that my parents started interfering in Connor's marriage in a super toxic way. They told him that his wife wasn't good enough for him, that he had gotten married too young, that he should focus on his career first. They called Connor constantly, showed up at his apartment without warning, literally made his wife's life impossible. And Connor, because he had always been the spoiled one and had never had to contradict my parents, didn't defend her. He didn't set boundaries. He simply let my parents do whatever they wanted. The marriage lasted less than 2 years. His wife asked for a divorce, and honestly, I don't blame her. Connor was devastated, and my parents acted like they were the victims. Suddenly, their perfect son was divorced and living alone, and they couldn't understand why. I knew exactly why, but obviously nobody asked for my opinion. And then came the day that changed everything. I was 18 years old. I had just turned 18 like 2 weeks before. I was in my last year of high school, in the middle of final exams, super stressed because I needed good grades to be able to apply to universities. Connor had been going through a hard time after the divorce, living in a tiny apartment, and my parents decided that the solution was for him to move back into the house, into my room. My room that I had been paying rent to be able to have. I came home from school one day, and all my stuff was in boxes at the entrance. I'm not joking. Everything. My clothes, my books, my art materials, even my toothbrush. My dad was standing there with his arms crossed and told me, "Connor needs your room. So either you find another place to stay or you can sleep on the couch, but you can't be here anymore. Something broke in me at that moment. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there staring at him. And I told him, "Really? After 4 years of paying rent, you're kicking me out 2 weeks before my final exams?" And my mom, who had been in the kitchen, came out and said, "Don't be dramatic. It's just temporary until Connor gets stable." But I knew it wasn't temporary. I knew Connor was going to stay, and I was going to be the one who would end up on the couch permanently, or worse. I called my grandparents. I told them, "I need to leave now." They arrived in less than an hour with a truck. My parents tried to stop them, saying they were being dramatic, that I was being a spoiled child, that we just needed to find a solution. But my grandfather, who had always been the calmest person in the world, told them, "You had 18 years to be decent parents and you failed. Now she's coming with us and we're not going to discuss this." We packed all my things in silence while my parents watched. Connor wasn't even there. I think he was working or something. Just before I left, my mom told me, "You're going to regret this. You're going to come back begging when you see that the real world isn't as easy as you think." I told her, "I've already been living in the real world since I was 14 when you forced me to work and pay rent. You never had to worry about that because your parents loved you." I left and didn't look back. Living with my grandparents was like breathing for the first time in years. I didn't have to pay rent. I didn't have to work all the time. I could focus on my studies and my art. My grandparents supported me completely. They asked me how I was. They were interested in my day. They cooked my favorite meals. It was what a normal family should be. You know what I mean? But like 2 months later, my parents showed up at my grandparents' house. They didn't call first. They didn't give notice. They just showed up one Sunday morning, knocking on the door insistently. My grandmother opened the door and they came in like nothing, acting like they were going to have a civilized conversation. But they didn't come to apologize or ask me how I was. They came to ask for money. It turns out that, after I left, they couldn't pay the mortgage on the house. Why? Because the $300 I was paying in rent each month had been covering a significant part of their expenses. Without that money, plus everything they were still spending on Connor, they were short every month. My mom, with tears in her eyes, begged me to come back and keep paying rent, or at least give them money to help with the mortgage. She told me it was my responsibility as part of the family to help in difficult times. I couldn't believe it. I literally sat there in shock listening to her. I told her, "You kicked me out of my own room 2 weeks before my finals, and now you want me to give you money?" And my dad said, "Well, it's also Connor's fault, but he doesn't have that much money right now, so we need you to contribute." My grandparents kicked them out of the house. They told them to never ask for money again, to never try to manipulate me again, and that if they came back without an invitation, they would call the police. But before they left, my grandfather dropped a bomb that I wasn't expecting. He told my parents they had changed their will. It turns out my parents were counting on receiving a significant inheritance when my grandparents passed away. It was like their retirement plan or something. But my grandparents had decided to give my parents' share to me. Not all of it. I mean, my uncles and my mom would still receive something. But the big part that my parents were expecting was now mine. My grandmother said, "We gave you this money in advance for years, so you would take care of our granddaughter, and you exploited and abused her. So now the money goes directly to her when she turns 25. My parents exploded. My dad started yelling at me, calling me manipulative, saying I had poisoned my grandparents against them, that I was a spoiled and ungrateful child. My mom told me I was a disgrace, that after everything they had done for me, this is how I repaid them. And I, honestly, just sat there taking it all in, because in my head I was thinking, what exactly did you do for me? Charge me rent? Force me to work as a minor? Ignore me my whole life while you worshipped Connor? They finally left, but before leaving, my mom threw one last stab at me. She told me, "Connor is going to hate you when he finds out about this. You're going to lose your only brother because of your selfishness." At that moment, that hurt me, I'm not going to lie. Because despite everything, Connor and I had had some good moments when we were kids, before the favoritism was so obvious. The following weeks were weird. I finished my finals, managed to get good grades despite the stress, and applied to several universities. My grandparents helped me with all the applications. They took me to visit campuses. They were there every step of the way. And when the acceptance letters arrived, I couldn't believe it. I had been accepted to the best art school in the state. Not only that, but I had received a partial scholarship. My grandparents told me they would cover the rest of the tuition, that I shouldn't worry about money, that I should just focus on my art and being happy. I cried so much that day. My grandparents hugged me and told me they had always believed in me, that they had always known I had talent and deserved all the opportunities in the world. It was the first time in my life that I felt someone in my Tina family was genuinely proud of me. But then Connor called me. We hadn't talked since I had moved in with my grandparents, like 3 months at that point. And he didn't call me to ask me how I was or to apologize for taking my room. He called me to ask me for money. He said he was going through a hard time, that he had just lost his job, that he needed help with the rent for his apartment. And he expected me, his younger sister who had just graduated from high school, to give him money. I asked him if he knew what our parents had done to me. There was silence on the other side. I asked him if he knew they had forced me to pay rent since I was 14, that they had kicked me out to give him my room, that they had exploited me for years while he lived without worries. And Connor, honestly, sounded genuinely surprised. He said he didn't know all the details, that he knew I worked but thought it was to have my own money, not because it was mandatory. He said he didn't know they had kicked me out, that our parents had told him I had decided to leave because I wanted more independence. I told him everything, every detail of the last 4 years, and I could hear him processing the information in real time. When I finished, he just said, "Oh God, I'm an idiot." And then he told me his side of the story. It turns out our parents had been interfering in his marriage much more than I had seen from the outside. They had told his wife horrible things about him. They had created drama constantly. They had done everything possible to sabotage the relationship. And when the marriage fell apart, Connor finally started to see the pattern of manipulation and control. He told me he was sorry. That he was sorry for not paying attention, for not being a better brother, for not questioning the different treatment we received. And I wanted to be furious with him. Honestly, because he had been complicit for years by simply accepting everything our parents gave him without wondering why I didn't receive the same. But I could also hear in his voice that he was really processing all this for the first time. I told him I wasn't going to give him money, but that if he really wanted to make things right, he needed to start by confronting our parents. I told him he needed to ask them directly why they had treated me like that, why they had destroyed his marriage, why they were like that. And to my surprise, Connor said he would. 2 weeks later, Connor called our parents and asked them for a meeting. I wasn't there, obviously, but he told me everything afterwards. He asked them why they had forced me to pay rent as a minor, why they had kicked me out of the house, why they had always treated me like I was less than him. And my parents, instead of taking responsibility, tried to turn the situation around. They told him I was problematic, that I had always been difficult, that they had only been trying to teach me important lessons. They told him I had manipulated them to keep the inheritance money that belonged to them. Connor didn't believe them. He told them they had destroyed his marriage with their interference, that they had destroyed any relationship he could have had with me, and that they were so obsessed with controlling his life that they couldn't see the damage they caused. He got up and left, and told them he didn't want to see them again until they could admit what they had done and genuinely apologize. My parents lost the house 3 months later. They couldn't keep paying the mortgage without my rent and with all the expenses they still had. They had to sell it quickly and ended up moving to a small apartment in a low-income area. And I know it sounds bad. You know what I mean? Like, I shouldn't be happy about other people's suffering, but I couldn't help feeling a bit of poetic justice in all that. They had bought that huge house to impress Connor's friends. They had gone into debt for years, and now they had lost everything, because they had exploited me, and I was no longer there to subsidize their lifestyle. But they didn't learn anything. Instead of reflecting on their actions, they decided I was the villain of the story. My mom made a Facebook post, like, a super long rant about how her daughter was ungrateful and had abandoned her family, that she had stolen their inheritance money, and that she wasn't even really her daughter anyway. That last comment left me frozen. I wasn't even her daughter? What was that supposed to mean? Was she insinuating I was adopted? That I wasn't her biological daughter? They had never told me anything about it. The post went viral in our local community, but not in the way she expected. People who knew me from school, from my job, neighbors who had seen me grow up, all started commenting defending me. They told stories of how they had seen me working since I was 14, how I had always been kind and hardworking, how my parents clearly favored Connor. Some teachers commented saying, my parents had never shown up to any of my school events but were always at Connor's games when he was in school. My grandparents also commented, not with specific details, but basically saying they knew the truth and that my parents should be ashamed. My mom eventually deleted the post, but the damage was already done. Everyone in our town now knew what kind of people they were. And I, honestly, didn't feel satisfaction from that. I just felt empty. Like, this was my mom, the person who was supposed to love me unconditionally, and she had called me illegitimate publicly on the internet. I decided to investigate what she had meant by that comment that I wasn't really her daughter. I talked to my grandparents and asked them directly if there was something they hadn't told me. My grandmother sighed and told me that yes, there was something, but it wasn't what my mom was insinuating. It turns out that when my mom got pregnant with me, it had been an accident. She and my dad didn't want me. They had seriously considered abortion or adoption. My grandparents convinced them to have me, with the promise that they would help financially and emotionally. My grandparents had paid for everything related to my upbringing the first years. They had been practically my primary parents until I entered school. And here comes the part that destroyed me. My grandparents told me that when I was born, they had established an education fund for me. It was a considerable fund, like enough to pay for a complete university education and more. They had given control of that fund to my parents when I was 10 years old, with the specific instruction that it was only for my education. But when my grandparents asked about that money recently to help me with college, my parents admitted they had spent it. All of it. They had used it for Connor's education, for the wedding they had planned for him, for the new house. They had taken my education fund and spent it on their favorite son. My grandparents were furious. They had trusted my parents with that money, and they had basically stolen it. That's why my grandparents had changed their will, because they realized that giving money to my parents was like throwing it in the trash. They wanted to make sure I received something directly without them being able to touch it. Everything started to make sense. That's why my parents had insisted so much that I pay rent. That's why they needed my money so desperately. They had spent my education fund, and now they were trying to replace that money using my own income. It was sick. You know what I mean? They had literally robbed my future twice. First with the fund, and then by forcing me to work. Connor found out about all this too, and finally had a real confrontation with our parents. He yelled at them, told them they were monsters, that they had ruined everything. And for the first time in his life, Connor set real boundaries. He told them he didn't want their money, didn't want their help, didn't want anything from them until they could admit what they had done and genuinely apologize to me and to him. Our parents, of course, refused. They said they hadn't done anything wrong, that they had been excellent parents, that we were the ungrateful ones. It's been a few months since all that. Connor and I are slowly rebuilding our relationship. It's not easy, honestly, because there's a lot of resentment on my part that I need to work through. But he's in therapy now, he's processing everything, and he's genuinely trying to be a better person. He told me recently that his ex-wife is pregnant, not with his child, obviously, but with her new partners, and that he's happy for her. He also told me he's been dating someone new, and that this time, he's setting boundaries from the beginning, not letting anyone interfere in his relationship. I started college 2 months ago. It's amazing. My work is being recognized. My professors tell me I have real talent, and for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm in the right place. I still live with my grandparents. I go back and forth from campus. They're so proud of me. They come to all my art exhibitions. I tell them about my classes. I have dinner with them every night. My parents tried to contact me one more time like a month ago. They sent a letter saying they missed their daughter, that they wanted to fix things, but that I needed to apologize first for all the drama I had caused, for abandoning them when they needed me most, for stealing their inheritance, for driving Connor away from them. I didn't respond. Connor didn't respond either when they sent him a similar letter. The truth is, I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive them. People say family is important, that you should always give second chances. But I don't know if they deserve that. They stole my childhood, my trust, my money. They made me feel like trash for years. And they can't even admit they did anything wrong. Connor asked me last week if I thought our parents would ever change. I honestly told him I didn't know, but that I wasn't going to wait to find out. I have my own life now. I have my grandparents who truly love me. I have my art, I have my future, and if my parents can never be part of that because they refuse to take responsibility, then so be it. I've been working on a collection of paintings for my advanced class. They're paintings about family, but not traditional family. They're about the family you choose, the family that saves you when the one you got by blood fails you. There's a painting of the doghouse my grandparents gave me when I was 5 years old, another of my grandparents' dining room table where we have dinner together, another of my hands holding a paintbrush with my grandmother's hands guiding me. My professor says it's the most emotional and personal work she's seen in years. I plan to dedicate that collection to my grandparents when I finish it. They saved me, literally. Without them, I don't know where I'd be now. Probably working 3 jobs trying to survive, without education, without hope. But thanks to them, I have all that and more. Connor came to see me last week and saw the paintings. He stood in front of the one of the doghouse for a long time. Then he told me, "I never knew how important that little house was to you. I never paid attention." And I told him, "Now you know, and that's what matters." I think he and I are going to be okay eventually. It's not going to be the typical sibling relationship. There will probably always be some tension, but we're trying. As for my parents, I don't know what to say. Part of me still wishes that someday they'll knock on my grandparents' door and say, "We're sorry, we messed everything up, we want to fix it." But the realistic part of me knows it's probably never going to happen. And I'm learning to be at peace with that. I don't need them to be happy. I don't need them to be successful. I don't need them for anything. I'm 18 years old. I'm at the best art school in the state. I have grandparents who love me more than I thought possible, and I have a brother who's finally trying to make things right. My first year of college is just beginning, and for the first time in my life, I can honestly say I'm excited about the future. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know I'm going to be okay, and I guess that's enough for now.